Sarah Martinez sat in the sterile waiting room of the Naval Medical Center, her fingers drumming nervously against her knee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the beige walls lined with military health posters. She glanced at her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Her annual physical exam was just another box to check off on her growing list of military requirements, nothing more. At 26, Sarah had been serving in the Navy for 8 years. She started as a young recruit straight out of high school, eager to serve her country and escape the small town where everyone knew everyone's business. The military had given her purpose, structure, and a chance to prove herself in a world that didn't always believe women belonged in uniform. The receptionist called her name, and Sarah followed a young corpsman down a long hallway lined with examination rooms. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the polished linoleum floors. She had done this routine dozens of times before. Blood pressure, weight, vision test, a few questions about her health, and she would be out of there in 30 minutes. "Room 7, the corpsman said, opening the door. "The doctor will be with you shortly." Sarah changed into the standard hospital gown and sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. She stared out the small window at the base beyond, watching sailors in their crisp white uniforms hurrying between buildings. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground where she had marched countless times during her early training. She thought about her upcoming deployment. In 3 weeks, she would be shipping out on the USS Independence for a 6-month tour in the Mediterranean. It would be her 4th deployment, but this one felt different. She had been promoted to Petty Officer First Class, which meant more responsibility and higher expectations. The weight of leadership had been pressing on her shoulders more each day. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and Sarah expected to see the usual base doctor, probably someone young and fresh out of medical school doing their military service. Instead, a tall man in his 50s entered the room. His uniform bore the insignia of a rear admiral, and multiple ribbons decorated his chest. His graying hair was perfectly groomed, and his posture spoke of decades of military discipline. "Good morning, Petty Officer Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Admiral James Harrison. I'll be conducting your examination today." Sarah was taken aback. Admirals didn't conduct routine physicals for enlisted personnel. Something was definitely unusual about this situation. She shook his hand, noticing the firm grip and the way his eyes seemed to assess everything around him with military precision. "Sir, I wasn't expecting. I mean, this is just a routine physical," Sarah stammered. Admiral Harrison smiled slightly. "Sometimes routine can become extraordinary, Petty Officer. Please have a seat on the table." He began the standard examination procedures, checking her blood pressure, listening to her heart and lungs, testing her reflexes. His manner was professional and thorough, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple medical checkup. The Admiral's reputation preceded him. She had heard stories about James Harrison throughout the fleet. He was a former Navy SEAL who had risen through the ranks during some of the most dangerous operations of the past 3 decades. As the examination continued, Admiral Harrison asked the usual questions about her health, any medications she was taking, and her exercise routine. Sarah answered honestly, but she could feel his eyes studying her, as if he were looking for something specific. "Any injuries or accidents in the past year?" he asked, making notes on his clipboard. "Nothing significant, sir. Just the usual bumps and bruises from training and daily duties." "I see. Well, I'll need you to remove your gown for the physical examination. Standard procedure." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had been through this countless times, but something about the Admiral's presence made her more self-conscious than usual. She slipped off the gown, keeping her back turned as much as possible. Admiral Harrison began his examination, checking her posture and muscle tone. His movements were professional, clinical, but when his eyes fell upon her back and shoulders, he stopped. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Sarah felt the change in atmosphere immediately. The Admiral's breathing seemed to pause, and she could sense his attention focusing on something specific. She had almost forgotten about them herself, so accustomed had she become to hiding them from the world. "Petty Officer Martinez," Admiral Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there moments before. "These scars on your back and shoulders, they're quite extensive." Sarah's heart began to race. She had hoped they wouldn't be noticed, or if they were, that they would be dismissed as old training injuries. But she could tell from the Admiral's tone that he recognized them for what they really were. "They're old, sir, from when I was younger." "How old?" Sarah's mouth felt dry. "Before I enlisted, sir." Admiral Harrison moved around to face her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Petty officer, in my 30 years of service, I've seen many types of injuries. I've treated wounded soldiers in combat zones, and I've seen the aftermath of various accidents and incidents. These scars, they have a very specific pattern." Sarah reached for her gown, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her physical state. "Sir, I'd prefer not to discuss." "They're defensive wounds," Admiral Harrison continued, his voice gentle but firm. "The kind someone gets when they're trying to protect themselves from repeated physical assault." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. For 8 years, she had buried her past, determined to be seen only as a capable sailor, not as a victim of anything. "With respect, sir, my medical history before enlisting shouldn't be relevant to my current fitness for duty." Admiral Harrison set down his clipboard and leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You're absolutely right, petty officer. Under normal circumstances, past injuries wouldn't matter as long as they don't affect your current performance. But I have to ask you a question, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." Sarah waited, her heart pounding. "Why are you even here?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir." "In the military. Why did you join? What are you really running from or running toward?" Sarah stared at him, unsure how to respond. It wasn't a question she had expected during a routine medical exam, and certainly not from a rear admiral she had never met before. Sarah felt the walls of the examination room closing in around her. Admiral Harrison's question echoed in her mind, bringing back memories she had spent years trying to forget. She pulled the hospital gown tighter around herself, as if it could somehow protect her from the vulnerability she felt. "I joined to serve my country, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Harrison studied her face carefully. "That's the answer you give in interviews, petty officer, but we both know there's more to it than that." He picked up her medical file and flipped through it slowly. "Your enlistment records show you joined at 17. You needed parental consent, but the signature on your forms, it's barely legible." Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She remembered that day at the recruitment office, forging her father's signature while the recruiter looked the other way. Everyone involved knew something wasn't right, but they also knew that sometimes the military was the only escape route for kids from broken homes. "My father wasn't available to sign in person," she managed to say. "I'm sure he wasn't." Admiral Harrison closed the file and set it aside. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah for a moment?" The use of her first name startled her. In 8 years of military service, very few superior officers had addressed her so informally. She nodded. "I grew up in a house where violence was a daily occurrence," Admiral Harrison said quietly. "My father was a career Marine who brought the war home with him every night. My mother bore the brunt of it, but my younger sister and I, we got our share too." Sarah looked up at him in surprise. This wasn't the conversation she had expected to have with a rear admiral. "Those scars on your back, they tell a story. The way you carry yourself, always alert, always ready to defend or flee. The fact that you've excelled in every combat training scenario but struggle with trust exercises during team building. It's all in your personnel file, Sarah. The patterns are there if you know what to look for." "Sir, I don't understand why this matters. My performance reviews have been excellent. I've never failed an evaluation or caused any problems." Admiral Harrison walked to the window and gazed out at the base. "You're absolutely right. You've been an exemplary sailor. But excellence born from survival instincts is different from excellence born from genuine passion and purpose. And that difference matters when we're talking about the kind of mission I have in mind." "Mission, sir." He turned back to face her. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is classified. But before I continue, I need to know that you're ready to face your past, because where I'm thinking of sending you, your history won't be a liability. It might actually be your greatest asset." Sarah felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I'm listening, sir." "There's a new initiative being developed by Naval Special Operations. We're creating a team of operatives who can work in environments where traditional military personnel would stand out. Places where being a survivor, someone who understands violence and trauma, would actually be an advantage. He paused, watching her reaction carefully. We've identified several potential candidates across all branches of the military. People who have overcome significant personal challenges but have channeled that experience into exceptional service. You're on that list, Sarah. What kind of environments are we talking about, sir? Human trafficking operations, domestic violence situations that intersect with national security, places where victims need someone who understands what they've been through, someone they can trust. Admiral Harrison returned to his position near the examination table. But this kind of work requires complete honesty about your background. No more hiding, no more pretending the scars don't exist. Sarah felt her breathing become shallow. The idea of deliberately exposing her past, of using it as a tool for military operations, was both terrifying and oddly appealing. For years, she had seen her history as a weakness to overcome. The thought that it might actually be a strength was completely foreign to her. I need to know what really happened to you, Sarah. Not the sanitized version you've been living with, but the truth. Because if you can't face it yourself, you'll never be able to help others face theirs. Sarah closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 17 again, standing in her childhood bedroom, listening to her father's heavy footsteps in the hallway. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, feel the fear that made her stomach clench every night when he came home from the factory. "My father," she began, then stopped. The words felt foreign in her mouth. She had never spoken about this to anyone, not even the military counselors during her initial processing. "Take your time," Admiral Harrison said gently. "My father was angry all the time. My mother left when I was 12. She just disappeared one day while he was at work, left a note saying she couldn't take it anymore." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "After that, it was just me and him." "And he took his anger out on you?" Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. The memories came flooding back despite her efforts to keep them buried. The belt, the fists, the way he would explode over the smallest things. Burnt dinner, a B grade instead of an A, talking back when he was yelling at her. "The scars on my back, they're from his belt buckle. The ones on my shoulders, those are from when he would grab me and shake me, digging his fingers in until I bruised." The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly would make them hurt less. Admiral Harrison listened without interruption, his face grave but understanding. "I learned to read his moods to predict when he would explode. I got good at avoiding him, at making myself invisible. But sometimes, especially when he was drinking, nothing I did mattered." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The night before I enlisted, he came home drunk and angrier than I'd ever seen him. He had been laid off from his job, and he blamed me for costing him money, for being a burden." "What happened?" "He beat me worse than he ever had before. I thought he was going to kill me. When he finally passed out, I packed a bag and walked to the recruitment office. I slept in the parking lot until they opened in the morning." The room fell silent. Sarah had never spoken these words aloud before, and saying them felt like releasing pressure from a valve she didn't even know was there. "You were 17 years old and you chose to save yourself," Admiral Harrison said finally. "That takes incredible strength and courage." "It doesn't feel like courage. It felt like running away." "Sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do. The fact that you channeled that experience into service, into protecting others, that's what courage really looks like." Sarah looked at him with new understanding. "You said you grew up in violence too. Is that why you became a SEAL?" Admiral Harrison smiled grimly. "Partly. When you grow up in chaos, you either become chaos yourself or you dedicate your life to fighting it. I chose to fight it. And now I'm asking you to consider doing the same, but in a different way." Admiral Harrison moved to his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder marked with various classification stamps. Sarah recognized the security level markings immediately. This was far above her current clearance level. "What I'm about to show you doesn't officially exist yet," he said, opening the folder on the examination table. "The operation is called Project Sanctuary. It's a joint initiative between the Department of Defense, FBI, and several international agencies." Sarah leaned forward to look at the documents, her medical examination now completely forgotten. The papers contained organizational charts, mission objectives, and what appeared to be case studies from around the world. "The premise is simple but revolutionary," Admiral Harrison continued. Traditional law enforcement and military operations often fail when dealing with victims of long-term trauma and abuse. These victims don't trust authority figures, especially men in uniform. They've learned that people in power often hurt them, not help them. He pointed to a series of photographs showing various operations. In the past 2 years, we've lost critical intelligence in 12 separate human trafficking cases because the victims wouldn't talk to our agents. They've been trained to fear anyone who looks official. Sarah studied the images. Young women, children, all with the same haunted look in their eyes that she remembered seeing in her own mirror years ago. This is where operatives like you would come in. People who understand trauma from the inside, who can recognize the signs and know how to approach victims in a way that builds trust instead of fear. You want me to go undercover in trafficking operations? Among other things, yes. But it's not just about undercover work. We're also looking at developing new protocols for victim extraction and rehabilitation. Traditional debriefing methods often re-traumatize victims. We need people who understand how to communicate with someone who's been broken and rebuilt. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The idea of deliberately putting herself back into situations involving violence and abuse seemed like psychological torture. "I can see you're concerned," Admiral Harrison observed. "And you should be. This isn't a decision to make lightly. The psychological impact could be severe even for someone with your background." "Then why are you asking me to do it?" Admiral Harrison closed the folder and sat down across from her. "Because right now, there are thousands of people trapped in situations just like what you escaped from, and the traditional approaches to helping them aren't working. We need people who can look at a victim and say, 'I understand what you've been through, and I can help you find a way out.'" Sarah thought about her father, about the years of fear and helplessness. She had often wondered what would have happened if someone had reached out to her, if someone had recognized what was happening and offered genuine help instead of just calling social services and moving on. What would the training involve? 6 months of specialized preparation. Advanced combat training, psychological preparation, cultural immersion programs, and most importantly, intensive therapy to help you process your own experiences in a way that makes you stronger, not more vulnerable. He pulled out another document. You would be working with some of the best psychologists and trauma specialists in the country, people who understand both the therapeutic and operational aspects of what we're trying to accomplish. Sarah scanned the training outline. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in the military. Combat training mixed with therapy sessions, language immersion combined with cultural sensitivity training, tactical planning alongside victim advocacy workshops. The candidates we're considering have all demonstrated exceptional performance despite significant personal challenges. But more than that, they've shown the ability to use their experiences to help others. "How do you know I can do that? I've never even told anyone about my background before today." Admiral Harrison smiled. "Your personnel file tells a different story. 3 years ago, you noticed that Seaman Rodriguez was showing signs of domestic abuse. You spent 2 weeks building trust with her before she finally admitted that her husband was beating her. You helped her get to safety and testified at his court-martial." Sarah remembered Rodriguez. She had seen the way the young sailor flinched when men raised their voices, how she made excuses for bruises that were clearly not from training accidents. "Last year, you identified a young recruit during basic training who was cutting herself. Instead of reporting it through official channels, you spent hours talking with her, got her connected with proper counseling, and probably saved her life." "How do you know all this?" "Because we've been watching, Sarah. People who have survived trauma often develop an ability to recognize it in others. You've used that ability instinctively to help your fellow service members. We want to give you the tools and authority to do it on a much larger scale." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. "What about my upcoming deployment?" "That would be canceled. If you accept this assignment, your next 6 months would be spent in specialized training. After that, you would be assigned to a joint task force based out of Norfolk, but your missions could take you anywhere in the world." The room fell quiet as Sarah processed everything she had heard. Just an hour ago, her biggest concern was getting through a routine physical exam. Now, she was being offered a chance to completely change the direction of her career and her life. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "Of course, but I need to stress something important. If you choose this path, there's no going back to being anonymous. Your past will become part of your professional identity. Everyone you work with will know what you've survived. That kind of exposure can be difficult to handle. Sarah understood. For 8 years, she had carefully constructed an identity based on competence and reliability, never letting anyone see the broken pieces underneath. The idea of deliberately revealing those pieces was terrifying. On the other hand, Admiral Harrison continued, those experiences could become your greatest professional asset. Instead of something you survived, they become tools you use to save others. He stood up and gathered his papers. I'm going to give you 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer goes to someone else. We need to start training the first class next month. What exactly are you asking me to decide? Whether you're ready to stop running from your past and start using it as a weapon against the people who create victims like you were. Admiral Harrison paused at the door. One more thing, Sarah. If you accept this assignment, you'll be working directly for me. I've requested you specifically because I believe you have the potential to become one of the best operatives we've ever trained. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the examination room, still wearing the hospital gown, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and she could hear the normal sounds of the medical center continuing around her. But everything felt different now. She thought about the young women in the photographs, about Rodriguez and the recruit who had been cutting herself. She thought about her 17-year-old self, sleeping in a recruitment office parking lot because it was safer than going home. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah began to consider the possibility that her past might actually be the key to her future, rather than something she needed to escape from. Sarah walked through the base housing complex that evening, her mind spinning with everything Admiral Harrison had told her. The neat rows of military housing looked different somehow, as if she were seeing them through new eyes. Behind each door lived families with their own stories, their own secrets, their own pain. She climbed the stairs to her small apartment, grateful for the solitude. For 8 years, she had preferred living alone, keeping her personal life separate from her military career. Now she understood why. She had been protecting herself, maintaining the walls that kept her past buried. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and tried to imagine what her life might look like if she accepted Admiral Harrison's offer. The training alone would be unlike anything she had experienced. Advanced combat techniques, psychological preparation, specialized skills she had never dreamed of learning. But it was the mission itself that both thrilled and terrified her. The idea of deliberately walking back into worlds filled with violence and abuse, even as a trained operative, felt like volunteering to relive her worst nightmares. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her friend Martinez from the engineering department. Hey Sarah, want to grab dinner at the mess hall? Actually, I think I need to stay in tonight. Got some things to think about. Everything okay? You sound different. Sarah almost laughed. If only Martinez knew how different everything had become in the span of a single morning. Just tired, long day. After hanging up, Sarah found herself pulling out a small box she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. Inside were the few possessions she had brought with her when she enlisted. A photograph of her mother, taken before she left. A letter her mother had written but never sent, which Sarah had found years later when she returned to clean out her father's house after his death. She unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was yellowed and worn from handling. My dearest Sarah, it read, I know you won't understand why I had to leave, and I know you'll probably hate me for it. But I couldn't take you with me, and I couldn't stay and watch him destroy us both. I hope someday you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll find a way to be stronger than I was. Sarah had read the letter hundreds of times, trying to understand her mother's choice. For years, she had felt abandoned and angry. But sitting there now, considering Admiral Harrison's proposal, she began to see it differently. Her mother had made an impossible choice between her own survival and her daughter's safety. Sarah had made a different choice. She had found a way to save herself and then dedicated her life to protecting others. The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with her current commanding officer, Captain Reynolds. She needed to understand what accepting Admiral Harrison's offer would mean for her career. Petty Officer Martinez, Captain Reynolds said as she entered his office. I understand you had an interesting medical exam yesterday. Word traveled fast in the military. Yes, sir, Admiral Harrison briefed you. He told me he had made you an unusual offer. He also told me I should expect to lose one of my best sailors if you're smart enough to accept it. Captain Reynolds had been Sarah's commanding officer for 2 years. He had recommended her for promotion and written glowing performance reviews. His opinion mattered to her. "What do you think I should do, sir?" "Honestly, I think you'd be crazy not to take it. I've read your file, Martinez. I know you have skills and instincts that most sailors don't possess. But I also know you've been holding something back, keeping part of yourself locked away." Sarah was surprised by his directness. "Sir, you're an exceptional sailor, but you've always maintained a certain distance. You excel at everything, but you never quite connect with your teammates the way natural leaders do. It's like you're afraid to let people see who you really are." His words stung because they were accurate. Sarah had spent years perfecting the art of being competent without being vulnerable. This opportunity Admiral Harrison is offering you, it's not just about a new assignment. It's about becoming the person you were meant to be instead of the person you felt you had to be to survive. That afternoon, Sarah found herself in the base chapel. She wasn't particularly religious, but the quiet space felt like the right place to make such a significant decision. A few other sailors sat scattered throughout the pews, each lost in their own thoughts. She thought about the girl she had been at 17, desperate and afraid but determined to survive. She thought about the woman she had become, competent and strong but still hiding from her own story. And she tried to imagine the person she might become if she chose to transform her pain into purpose. The chapel was nearly empty when she finally left, but her decision was clear. The next morning, Sarah called Admiral Harrison's office and requested a meeting. When she arrived, he was waiting for her with the same manila folder from the day before. "Have you made your decision, petty officer?" "I have, sir, but I have some conditions." Admiral Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "First, I want to know exactly who else will be on this team. I need to understand what kind of people I'll be working with." "Fair enough. We have identified 12 potential candidates across all branches. The final team will consist of 6 operatives, including you if you accept." He opened the folder and showed her redacted profiles of the other candidates. Each had a similar story to hers. Childhood trauma that had been channeled into exceptional military service, combined with demonstrated ability to help others in crisis situations. "Second, I want regular psychological evaluations throughout the training and deployment. I've seen what happens when people in high-stress situations don't get proper mental health support. Already built into the program, monthly evaluations during training, weekly sessions during active deployment. And third, I want the right to withdraw from the program at any time during training if I feel it's compromising my mental health." Admiral Harrison studied her face carefully. "That's a reasonable request, but I need you to understand something. Once you start this training, once you know what we're really doing and how we operate, there will be security implications to withdrawing." "What kind of implications?" "You'll have access to classified information and operational details that could compromise ongoing missions. If you withdraw, you'll likely be reassigned to a position where you have no access to sensitive information for the remainder of your military service." Sarah considered this. It was a significant risk. If the training didn't work out, she could find herself stuck in a dead-end position for the rest of her career. "I understand, sir. I still want that option." "Very well. Do you have any other conditions?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Just one more. I want to write a letter to be placed in my personnel file explaining my decision and my background. If something happens to me during this assignment, I want there to be a record of why I chose this path." Admiral Harrison smiled for the first time since she had met him. "That tells me you're approaching this decision with the right mindset. You understand the risks, but you're willing to accept them for the right reasons." "So do we have an agreement?" "We do. Welcome to Project Sanctuary, Operative Martinez." The title felt strange but oddly fitting. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was moving toward something instead of running away from something. Admiral Harrison handed her a thick packet of documents. "Your orders, training schedule, and security clearance paperwork. You report to the Naval Special Operations Facility in Virginia Beach on Monday. From that point forward, your old life effectively ends and your new one begins." As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror that she had never experienced before. She was about to become someone she had never imagined she could be, using skills she had never dreamed of developing for a mission that could make a real difference in the world. For the first time since she was 17 years old, Sarah Martinez felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a briefing room at the Naval Special Operations Facility, looking dramatically different from the nervous sailor who had walked into a routine medical exam. Her hair was shorter, her posture more confident, and her eyes held a clarity that had been missing before. The intensive training had transformed not just her skills, but her entire sense of self. The specialized training had been unlike anything she could have imagined. Combat techniques that went far beyond standard military training, psychological preparation that had forced her to confront and process her trauma in ways that made her stronger rather than more vulnerable, and cultural immersion that had taught her to blend into civilian populations while maintaining her operational awareness. But the most significant change had been internal. Through months of therapy and specialized counseling, Sarah had learned to see her past not as a source of shame or weakness, but as a unique qualification for the work she was about to undertake. Today marks your graduation from the initial phase of Project Sanctuary, Admiral Harrison announced to the 6 operatives who had completed the program. Over the past 6 months, you have been transformed from survivors into specialists. Sarah looked around at her teammates. There was Marcus, a former Army Ranger who had grown up in foster care and had an uncanny ability to connect with abandoned children. Rebecca, a Marine who had survived human trafficking as a teenager and now spoke 5 languages fluently. David, an Air Force operative whose experience with domestic violence had given him exceptional skills in reading dangerous situations. Each of them had started the program as someone running from their past. They were graduating as people equipped to confront that past in others and help them find freedom. Your first operational assignment begins next week, Admiral Harrison continued. Intelligence has identified a human trafficking network operating out of Eastern Europe. Traditional approaches have failed because the victims refuse to trust law enforcement. Local authorities have requested our assistance. He activated a screen showing photographs and intelligence reports. The operation is run by an organization that specifically targets young people from abusive backgrounds. They know these victims won't be missed, won't be looked for, and won't trust authority figures who try to help them. Sarah studied the intelligence photos. The faces looking back at her were heartbreakingly familiar. The same haunted expressions, the same defensive postures, the same look of resigned hopelessness that she remembered from her own mirror years ago. Operative Martinez will be the primary contact for victim extraction and preliminary debriefing. Your background and psychological profile make you the ideal choice for building trust with female victims aged 15 to 25. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but it was excitement rather than fear. For the first time in her life, her past was being recognized not as a liability to overcome, but as a qualification for important work. The mission parameters are complex. You'll be working with local law enforcement, international agencies, and civilian rehabilitation organizations. Your job is not just to extract victims, but to help them transition from survivors back to people with futures. Over the next 3 days, Sarah and her team received detailed briefings about their first mission. The trafficking network they would be targeting operated sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that kept victims compliant even when rescue opportunities arose. Traditional raid and rescue operations often fail because victims have been conditioned to see any disruption of their situation as potentially worse than their current circumstances, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychological specialist who had overseen their training. Your job is to approach them as someone who understands their situation, not as an authority figure trying to impose a solution on them. You speak their language, not just linguistically but emotionally. The night before departure, Sarah called Captain Reynolds to let him know she was shipping out on her first assignment. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Honestly, terrified and excited at the same time. But for the first time in my career, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do." "That's because you are. Good luck, Operative Martinez, make us proud." Sarah hung up and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was someone she was still getting used to. Strong, confident, purposeful. Someone who had taken the worst experiences of her life and transformed them into tools for helping others. She thought about her 17-year-old self, sleeping in that recruitment office parking lot, desperate and afraid. That girl could never have imagined that her pain would someday become the foundation for saving others. The next morning, Sarah boarded a military transport plane bound for Germany, the first stop on her journey to Eastern Europe. As the plane took off, she opened the mission briefing one final time and studied the faces of the victims they hoped to rescue. "We're coming for you," she whispered to their photographs, "and we understand exactly what you've been through." Admiral Harrison had been right. Excellence born from survival was different from excellence born from passion. But when those two forces combined, when survival skills were channeled into passionate purpose, the result was something extraordinary. As the plane crossed the Atlantic, Sarah reflected on the question that had started everything. Why are you even here? She finally had her answer. She was here to transform her pain into purpose, her survival into service, her scars into strength. She was here to prove that broken things, when properly healed, often became stronger than things that had never been damaged at all. The routine medical exam that had exposed her secrets had become the doorway to a life she never could have imagined. A life where her worst experiences became her greatest qualifications, where her deepest wounds became the source of her most important work. Admiral Harrison had seen something in those scars that Sarah herself had never recognized. Not just evidence of what she had survived, but proof of what she was capable of surviving. And more importantly, proof of her capacity to help others do the same. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in a safe house in Prague, holding the hand of a 19-year-old girl who had just been extracted from a trafficking operation. The girl's eyes held the same fear and mistrust that Sarah remembered from her own past. "My name is Sarah," she said gently in the girl's native language. "I know what you've been through. I know you don't trust anyone right now, and that's okay. But I want you to know that you're safe now and you're not alone." The girl looked at Sarah's uniform, at her confident posture, at the team of professionals working around them to process other victims. "How could you possibly know what I've been through?" the girl asked. Sarah rolled up her sleeves, revealing faded scars on her forearms that matched similar marks on the girl's skin. "Because I've been where you are," Sarah said simply, "and I'm here to show you that there's a life waiting for you beyond all of this." For the first time since her rescue, the girl's defensive expression softened slightly. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we help you remember who you were before they tried to break you," Sarah replied. "And then we help you become who you were always meant to be." As Sarah began the careful process of helping the girl take her first steps toward recovery, she understood completely why Admiral Harrison had asked his seemingly simple question. "Why are you even here?" She was here because sometimes the people best equipped to pull others out of darkness are those who have found their own way to the light. She was here because her scars had become her credentials, her pain had become her purpose, and her survival had become her service. She was here because a routine medical exam had become the moment when her real life finally began.